Hey, discern listeners, Jorge and Anfisa, let's watch.
No, the same as before.
What do you mean? Aren't you a millionaire?
No,
What do you mean, no? That's what you told me.
I'm not a millionaire. I'm just trying to be honest with you. In fact, in all honesty, I am in a little debt.
What?
Okay, so we get a little bit more specific information about what he told her. We knew that he told her or gave the impression that he had a lot of money, but specifically the word millionaire comes up. And I guess that implies that you have $1 million in cash. You know, when I was young, I just thought like all rich people just had like this pile of money, you know, like Scrooge McDuck or something. But the older you get, it's like, well, you know, do you count your car that you've paid off halfway? Do you count the house that the mortgage, you know, how do you count your money exactly? And so who knows what one means when they say they're a millionaire? Does that mean that he is saying that he has a house that is worth $700,000 and a few cars? You know, I don't know. But you throw around the word millionaire, then that implies obviously that you have a lot of money. So that's what he told her, and he's confirming that. And it looks like he is not doing well. In fact, he might be the opposite of a millionaire, meaning that he's in debt a lot of money. From his lifestyle, it looks like he either has a lot of money coming in and he's trying to get out ahead and he overspends, or a lot of the things that he owns, he actually is renting or leasing or paying off, and he's having trouble paying off his debts. I guess that explains the house they live in, or the home they live in, which looks like a nice apartment, but not like an amazing apartment. But then he has that car that he double parked, of course. And when I reacted to it when he double parked, I appreciated a lot of you agreeing with me about that. It's just like, come on, dude. Like, and the thing I always think of, and I don't know if I said this at the time, that if you don't have the kind of car that can follow the rules and regulations of being a member of one's society, then maybe you shouldn't buy that car. For me, for example, every time I buy a car, I always just buy something that I don't really care that much about because I don't want to have to worry about it. I always buy Hondas, of course. I've tried not to buy Hondas. Every once in a while, I'll be like, okay, this is ridiculous. Everyone in my family, we always buy Hondas. Let's buy something else. And I'll go to a Toyota lot or a Ford lot or a Chevy lot. And every time I'm like, I don't know, it's like, could I buy a Toyota? Yeah, because Honda and Toyota have very similar, models. But I'm always like, well, if I'm gonna buy a car like this, I might as well get a Honda, right? So whenever me and Stacy go into the dealership to have our car worked on or something, an oil change, they're always like, your name is Honda? And it's just so interesting. I feel like I'm pulling a lever on a slot machine where you don't know what's going to happen, because a lot of people, particularly in Seattle, because there's a lot of Japanese Americans and a fair amount of Hondas and Suzukis and Yamahas, that I don't get a reaction a lot of the times, especially as I get older and especially if I'm in Seattle proper, which is where most of the Asian Americans live, and also East Side, Bellevue anyway. And so a lot of times I don't get a reaction, but sometimes I'll just get like, it's the first time they've ever met someone that had a name that coincided with the car. And to me, I'm thinking, if you said something like, oh, that's interesting, your name's Honda, you have Honda. I'm sure a lot of people say that. Like, okay, but people sometimes react like I'm from outer space or something, and I'm thinking, what do you think the Honda car is named after? It's a brand name after someone's name whose his name was Honda. The same way that Ford was named after a guy named Henry Ford. I'm sure there was some dude named Chevrolet or something. And I don't know, it just feels like, is it that Harley Davidson, right? Of course, you understand this is someone's, I guess it's probably two people's last name. Anyway, so I actually went to the dealership with my car. This is a total tangent anyway, but I went to the counter and said my name and your car and your name and what's your name? I said, my name is Kirk Honda. And the guy looked at me and which is fine, because you could imagine someone being confused. Like, are you saying your car, or are you saying the dealership you got? Because there's a Kirkland Honda, which was founded after I was born. I just want to point that out. I'm pretty sure. Anyway. And so they're named after me. That's my point. Just joking. And then he's like, oh. And I repeat, it's like Kirk Honda. And he's like, oh, okay. And I don't know. I'm just getting to the age where I just don't want to deal with it anymore. You know, for a long time, it felt like I don't know, I guess it depends on the mood I'm in. Because if I'm in a good mood, it'll be kind of funny, you know? Like sometimes I'll say, Kirk as in captain and Honda as in the car. Or the lawnmower, I'll say. Sometimes I'll get a laugh. Kind of a dad joke. But anyway, so sometimes I'm like leaning into it. Other times it's just like, can I just say my name and have it not be a whole thing in production? Because it happens all the time. Anyway, so he reacted like, huh? Which is fine. He's confused. It's a confusing situation. I repeated my name and he was like, oh, okay. And he got it. And by the way, like this is just a larger thing that I often will go into in terms of microaggressions regarding racism. Like when someone from Korea has the name Dong or someone from China has the name Wang, it's like, let it go, people. Like, get your minds out of the gutter. This is someone's name. And how many times have they heard the jokes? Just let it go. In fact, one of the funniest scenes that I've seen around this was in The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, in which Kimmy Schmidt, the character, has this guy that she likes whose name is, I think his name is Dong. And they are introducing themselves to each other. And he says, my name is Dong. And she says, my name is Kimmy. And he starts to laugh. And she's like, why are you laughing? He says, well, in my country, the word Kimmy is a word for penis or something like that. And it's not like, oh, that's just genius. Like, you know, anyway, so I'm standing around in the dealership waiting for my car and I see a Honda shirt. Some of you actually on Instagram might have even seen this shirt. And so it was a classic with the Honda wings. And I was like, oh, you know, and one of my favorite t-shirts I ever bought like 5 years ago was from this dealership. They have like oil filters and and they're selling cars. And then they just have this little rack with like 3 shirts. And I bought a shirt from there because I was just standing around not doing anything. And it turned out to be, you know, when you get like a really good t-shirt, I would say like a fourth, maybe a 10th of the t-shirts that I've bought have been like, I don't even know how they become so great. Like it's the material and they last a long time and they fit well and they're comfortable. I don't know what it is about some t-shirts, but this shirt, and I don't have it anymore. I wonder what happened. Probably got shredded by something. But anyway, so I take it to where you purchase the t-shirts from is when you go to the parts department. So you go to the parts department where they sell all the parts. And so I say, I'd like to buy this shirt. And I paid with a credit card. I don't have to give my name. So I feel like I'm okay. I'm walking away and I don't think the guy realized that I wasn't yet out of earshot. And he turns around and just starts cackling because he's looking at the credit card receipt and it has my name. And he's cackling to one of his coworkers and they're just like, I don't know how to describe it. And sometimes I misinterpret these things, but it just seemed like the guy was like, I don't know. It felt racist. I'll just say it that way. You know, it's one thing to be like, oh my God, this guy's his last name is Honda. That's pretty cool. Like, that's not racist, right? But it could be mildly, but not to me. But to laugh at, like, it felt ridiculing. It felt like, oh, you know, it was the laugh of a hick, I don't want to say hick, but someone that just doesn't understand that our country has a lot of different names and your white ass names are new to our country too. Like Johnson and Anderson and Smith, these are immigrant names. They're not native to America. So Honda and Smith are both immigrants who came to our country. They're all outsider names. So, just because your names happen to be white names doesn't mean that your names are not cackleable and my name is cackle. You know what I'm saying? And I bet you anything that dude has not been a native to Seattle and the Washington State for as long as my family has. So it's just like some interloper family, which is fine, moves into Washington State and laughs at me like I'm the weird one. It just feels, who knows what's happening, but you can take interest. You can be like, oh, that's cool. Your name's Honda. You could even say something like, I'm sure you get a lot of jokes about that. You know, I appreciate that because it's some awareness like, yep. Or sometimes when people say that, I'm like, nope, never had a joke. And then they look at me and then we have a little laugh about that. So anyway, why was I telling you that? Oh, so what I was saying was that even though I sometimes think I'm midlife. Should I have a midlife crisis car? I'm like, nah, just buy a regular Honda, and if it gets dinged up or someone hits it with your door, it's like, who cares? People will worry about dings on their car, and I'm like, well, it's just a minor, it doesn't stop it from going from A to B. And I guess if it's your baby, fine, but don't drive it to the mall and double park. That's my whole point. Like, leave it in the garage, or only park in places where it doesn't matter or something. But if, these kinds of people who, or in the city in Seattle, it's more prevalent for someone to have a giant truck, like a giant truck that is just not conducive to parking in regular spots. And they'll, even when they're trying to take up just one spot, they won't. They're just bleeding into other spots. And I'm just like, now maybe it's a special circumstance. Anyway, my point is that he is saying that he told her that he was a millionaire, and now he's saying that he's in debt. So what does that mean? Well, I don't know. But the way that he comes across, especially with this detail, because up until this point, I was like, well, did he just give the impression that he was rolling in money, but he's only kind of rolling in money? But when I hear this, it's like he just flat out lied about a lot of things, and he might be in a pattern of lying. I'm just total speculation of taking out more debt to make him look a certain way that he is not that way. And by the way, they just had a whole scene where, of course, they looked at a super expensive house that she loves, of course, and it's out of his price range. He said he could afford $5,000 a month, which is a lot of money, and this house was something like $8,000 a month. And the house they were looking at was like a house that, I don't know, a super famous rich person would live in. I mean, it was fancy. I'm sure there are fancier houses, but I'm just like, even if you're a millionaire, like, I don't think that's wise if you're just the two of you. Anyway, so he is possibly showing us now that he has a personality that results in him lying frequently or trying to come across in a certain way. Of course, people will label this as narcissistic, but that's not how it reads to me. How it reads to me is desperation. And there could be a personality issue in there, personality sort of spectrum in there. Maybe an antisocial spectrum there. He doesn't come across as antisocial or a psychopath to me, but some ability or lack of regard for the truth. Because you just imagine, so I'm just going to take a guess and say that he was online and flirting with a lot of different people and trying to come across in a certain way. He might think that he's not very attractive and that he isn't a catch, that he doesn't have any other qualities like a personality or good looks or who knows what he thinks. But there are all sorts of things that he might feel as though he can't compete about. So as an act of desperation, he tries to say, well, I do have some money and I do have the ability to look like I have money, and so I will portray myself that way. And I will say that from reports, a lot of people do something along these lines where they will have pictures that are deceiving or a picture from 15 years ago or something, So it's not uncommon to do that, and along those lines, it's not a strong indication of a personality in which you don't mind breaking rules and don't mind breaking conventions. But anyway, then we also know that he works within the marijuana industry, which is, I believe, what he's doing is legal. I mean, he's talking about it openly. He's going into weed shops, isn't he? Right? Anyway, so that is legalized, but is he interested in that because it's on the edge of society? Psychopaths or antisocial people will often try to scheme ways of getting money. They don't typically want to earn money in the standard way. For example, psychopaths are very unlikely to become an accountant unless they thought becoming an accountant allowed them to scheme or play a game to work the system. People on the antisocial psychopathic spectrum they're always scheming. They're always trying to figure out some way to get ahead instead of just doing a regular, stable job because they feel like that's below them. It also hems them in terms of something that they frequently are thinking about, of like, how do I work this and how do I get ahead and how do I work the angle? And I'm special and these kinds of things. And so he doesn't come across as a strong candidate for that, but we're seeing a number of behaviors that might be the tip of the iceberg. But he does seem to be remorseful right now, like he's not coming after her, or he's not saying, like, the way if he was a full psychopath or full antisocial, usually there's no way to know for sure, but in this interaction, he wouldn't admit that he was in debt, because these people that are high on the spectrum will just lie, even way beyond the point where it would make sense. And what would typically happen is he would either try to put her down. He would try to figure out some way to get out of it. He might say, like, that house was a piece of crap. Don't worry about it. We'll figure out something better. Or, you're so fancy. You're always trying to get money. Some way of blaming her instead of actually just admitting it, which is what he's doing now. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Use the link below or the promo code Kirk, because that really helps us out. Let's talk about burnout. Signs of burnout include difficulty concentrating, no motivation, irritability. Are you working too much, not taking enough time for yourself? Often, burnout will just creep up on us, and before long, we've had months, if not years, of being worn thin, Well, that's where therapy comes in. I remember when I was getting burnt out in graduate school, having a therapist to talk to once a week was a lifesaver. And you often hear me saying that BetterHelp can be a really convenient option for getting therapy. Also, online therapy has been demonstrated by empirical research to be just as effective as in-person therapy. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can get matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/Kirk. That's betterhelp.com/Kirk. Get the help you need. You deserve it.
In debt before us being married.
And you didn't tell me?
It's just some accounts that I fell short on before getting married with Anfisa, but I lost the money because I was slacking.
Right. So someone high in the spectrum of any social or psychopathy would, one, they wouldn't admit to that, and two, they would have some excuse. They would say, like, well, it was, you don't understand, it was this total, I got completely ripped off by someone. I mean, if you've ever had a psychopath in your life or someone who is high on the antisocial personality disorder spectrum, it's like nothing is ever their fault. Everything's always, so it's one of the misconceptions of psychopaths is that if you listen to the internet or watch movies, psychopaths are always brilliant. They're always very smart, and they're working other people, and they always get out ahead, and they always win in the end. Or if they're the evil genius, then somehow a hero takes. But anyway, point is that the vast majority of people, particularly high in the spectrum, their lives are disasters. But they have a hard time taking responsibility, and they're distorted. So they will, if you have someone like this in your life, and I'm guessing some of you do, then over time, maybe 10, 20 years, because it takes a long time to start piecing everything together, because in the beginning, you're convinced by their lies because they're just so good at lying. And over time, suddenly you start realizing, oh, I think they've been lying to me this whole time. I mean, their life is always a disaster. They're always borrowing money. They're always harming other people. They're always seemingly lying, but they always seem to have an excuse. But when I just look at it a certain way, that maybe they've always been lying, and there's another side to the story in all those instances, it just flips your life around 180, because they're just so good at convincing everyone around them that everything is fine. Now, maybe he has a little bit of that has got him in this situation, and is lying to her as an indication of that, but he is admitting it right now and not providing any kind of excuses. Now, maybe he's really at the end of his rope and he just has to admit it, but even then, people on the high in the spectrum, they'll just never admit things that are just blatantly obvious. And he's way before that point, because there's so many other games that a psychopath could play to keep her off kilter.
Honest with me.
Well, I'm telling you now.
You should have told me before. I've always been honest with you, and you always lied to me. You promised me I'll get whatever I want.
Well, times have changed, and if you're not ready to adapt...
I'm not going to adapt. What does it mean?
Yeah, yuck. So she's right, and it makes total sense that she's like, you've been lying to me, and that's unfair. And absolutely, just the lie itself, and it was probably several lies, and the amount of time spent around that. That's another thing to think about in terms of a lie. It's like someone might think, well, I only lied to you once, but if you let someone believe an important detail for several months, you were basically lying every minute that you left that out, right? And some people say, I never lied. It's like, well, but you lied by omission, and you knew that that was an important detail. So understand that that is absolutely lying to someone. And she's right, and she's bothered by that, and she isn't even focusing on the money right now. She's just like, you lied to me, which is, like I said, it's a very extensive lie because it takes a long time. And it's manipulative, right? It's obvious that he lied to try to suck her in, and that is upsetting to her. And so that's going to bother anyone. And then his first defense against that is like, you need to adapt. It's like, to you lying? I'm supposed to adapt to you lying?
Adapt to what? To your lies? It's not going to work like that. George confesses to me that he's in debt, and I think it's
Yeah. So again, I keep hammering on this, that the common understanding of what's going on in this couple is that he is lying to her about money and wants her for her looks, and she only wants him for the money. And since he doesn't have the money, then their conflict ensues. And my hypothesis is that it's way deeper than that, and it's much more relatable than that, in that she has a lot of relational traumas regarding abandonment when she was growing up. There's some small evidence of that, possibly. He has issues of some kind. You might even call it like the incel personality disorder or something, where the person has a lot of shame and low self-esteem about their prospects romantically and sexually, and they absorb the misogyny and sexism in society and create this persona or pursue a persona because they believe that's what women want, because they've been told that. And so they try to game the system instead of just relating to someone and finding someone that you actually connect with emotionally. And so there's this way of coming around the corner and saying like, look at me, I have an interesting hat, now you will have sex with me, right? And it's just like, well, maybe, but like there's more genuine, more satisfying ways of getting someone's attention or finding your soulmate. But anyway, so that's where he's coming from. That's where she's coming from. They're both insecure. They're both desperate. She is highly triggered by any kind of distancing, which seems to happen occasionally. And then she reacts and she becomes very hurt, and she starts to, like think of Jasmine, these kinds of people. But on camera, she puts up a persona because she is trying to act tough, which I'm guessing she adopted when she was very young, or two, she knows that this is the storyline that the producers are looking for, and so she's leaning into that role of like, yeah, I'm a gold digger, I guess that's what you want here. So I don't know, it's just completely speculative. She could be the way that people are seeing her, but it doesn't look that way to me, particularly when we hear her behavior off camera, the way it's described, or when she's calling him and she might not even know that the cameras are there and filming him, and she's calling him and then turning off his phone and all that kind of stuff. It very much looks like some kind of borderline spectrum or some kind of preoccupied attachment, some kind of attachment insecurity. Of course, I can never know that, but it looks more like that. Plus, it's not usual that people are one-dimensional like that, the way that people think of her as this gold digger. It's pretty rare that people are just, maybe she's interested in money, but there's probably a lot of depth to her and a lot of normal humanness to her, not some cartoon character that people are painting her to be. Anyway, so you could imagine if that hypothesis is true, then this lie would be very hurtful. It would be very concerning. It would be like, so what else are you lying to me about? Are you cheating on me? Are you secretly not in love with me? What's going on here? You could imagine, if my hypothesis is even somewhat in the right ballpark, that this kind of lie could be very concerning to someone. It would be concerning to anyone, but could be very triggering to her.
After I moved here to tell me that he wasn't as rich as he told me before.
Business doesn't go well. What do you want me to do?
Business never went well. You just lied to me. When I
How
was
do
in
you
Russia,
know?
you were lying to me.
How do you know?
Don't interrupt me.
Maybe I exaggerated it a little bit to Anfisa about how much money I had, but I spent everything I had trying to impress her.
That doesn't negate the lie, to say, well, okay, maybe I lied and I said I was a millionaire when actually I'm in debt a lot of money. But I spent a lot of money on her. It's like, that doesn't, that just compounds the problem, because obviously you were spending even more money that you didn't have to uphold the lie. That doesn't make sense.
What do you think all this money that you spend on shopping, where does it come
nothing.
from? All this stuff that you're saying is so stupid, it doesn't make any sense. It's childish.
Uh-oh. Wow. So, remember what I said earlier? That the person higher on the spectrum will go after the victim and try to blame them. You rinse and repeat this enough times and you add a layer of coercion and control, then you have victimization and gaslighting. People will call this gaslighting. It's not gaslighting. In fact, someone sent me a video of a therapist on TikTok or something talking about how she was saying that, maybe I'll react to this at some point, but she was saying, when, if a man lies about something, it was something that was, a concern, but it was just one behavior. If he lies about, I can't remember what it was. I don't think it was cheating. It was something like, if he tries to come across like your feelings don't matter or something like that, then of course that's bad and it's not great, and it could be a red flag of something. And if we look at a lot of behaviors, it could be gaslighting, but just that one behavior. And the therapist says it's absolutely gaslighting, and it's a slam dunk indication of dark tetrad, which I don't know if you hear me talk. I've done deep dives on dark tetrad, but essentially it's psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism. And the dark tetrad, meaning that you have 4 personality traits, and if you have all 4, you are a very dark individual. You're very potentially what people might call evil. You prey on other people. You think you're the most awesome person in the world. You have no empathy. You're always scheming against other people, and you even get off on harming other individuals. It actually gives you pleasure. You're not just trying to screw other people over to get your needs met. Your needs actually involve harming other people. And these people are monsters, honestly. These people are out to harm other people. These people often end up in prison, and they're extremely rare. And there's no exact clinical threshold for all 4 personality traits within the dark tetrad, but for experts on the subject, for people to qualify for that, I'm guessing it's on the order of something like 0.1%, 0.01% of people have crossed that threshold on all 4. Because not only do you have to be psychopathic, which is pretty rare, but you also have to have significant narcissism, which a lot of psychopaths will have. You have to have significant Machiavellianism, which a lot of psychopaths will have, but you also have to have significant sadism, which is a very rare thing, and most psychopaths are not sadistic. So you have to have all those things. And this therapist on TikTok or somewhere was saying that if your boyfriend lies about this issue, then he obviously is a candidate for dark tetrad. I'm just like, it just screams of someone that has no idea what they're talking about. They looked it up on the internet and they read the qualities of dark tetrad. In fact, let's do that right now. I don't know. This is tangent week, apparently. So I Googled it, and the first thing that comes up looks to be a blog post on mental health at home. This was written in 2020, and it doesn't have an author listed, but it says dark triad traits, and it has listed Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, but not sadism. It's like, dark triad. So yeah, so originally we had dark triad, and then we added sadism for the dark tetrad. But anyway, so I typed in dark tetrad, but this one came. But then there's a mention of sadism regarding the dark tetrad. All right, and it describes Machiavellianism as, in a very brief sentence, says includes manipulative and exploitative behaviors, callousness, and elevated levels of self-interest. That's but we would really want to highlight the manipulativeness of the behavior. The callousness and the elevated levels of self-interest are more, and we would probably subsume those under psychopathy and narcissism. But anyway, so then narcissism, it says, includes grandiosity and lack of empathy. Again, lack of empathy is not the hallmark of narcissism, although it often is described that way. But the research demonstrates that people who are on the narcissistic spectrum have impaired empathy. They have the capacity for, at the very least, a primitive empathy. But psychopaths high on the spectrum have no empathy. They just don't care about other people's feelings. And then sadistic people actually notice other people's feelings because they want other people to be in pain or to be afraid. And these individuals are, sadistic individuals are really quite awful. And it's something that needs to be considered when you're utilizing language, particularly for you clinicians. And if you're a researcher in personality, of course, you understand this. But people will often use psychopathy as a stand-in for sadistic, but they're different personality traits. Psychopaths are more likely to be sadistic, but some sadists are not psychopaths, which is interesting. Some people actually have a desire to harm other people, and they get pleasure from that, which is a monstrous personality trait, often as a result of their childhood traumas and or genetics of coming from someone who also had that personality trait. And if they're not a psychopath, then they have that urge, but they don't want to act on it, or a large part of them doesn't want to act on that because they actually care about other people's feelings. They have empathy. They have altruism. They don't want to really hurt other people, but they get pleasure from that. It's the same as some individuals who have attraction to children, right? That they have an attraction, but for a lot of them, they actually have empathy and they don't want to hurt other people. Now, without any kind of treatment, sometimes they will give in to their urges and harm children, but a lot won't. A lot will say, well, I know I have this urge, but I also don't want to hurt anyone else, so I'm just not going to act on it. And that also needs to be understood. So it all needs to be separated out and understood. So not only will people say all psychopaths are sadists, but they'll say all narcissists are psychopaths and sadists. You'll hear people on the internet, when they use the word narcissistic, I would say anecdotally 99% of the time what they're talking about is a sadistic psychopath. They're not talking about someone with narcissism. So, and the other thing is, what do we mean by narcissism? Are we just talking about general narcissism? There's healthy narcissism. There's narcissistic personality disorder. There's narcissism within psychopathy. There's narcissism within sadism. What do you mean? Like, self-centeredness is such a broad idea. Anyway, so this site, and this says psychopathy includes impulsivity, callousness, remorselessness, and selfishness. Again, the impulsivity thing is a part of the lack of care, although some people consider impulsivity to be a major component of psychopathy because it highlights the theory that some psychopaths emerge from a personality in which they don't have fear. And so they look impulsive from the outside, but they don't really have that editor in their behavior in terms of like, well, if you do this, you might actually hurt yourself. And so reports of children or even adults with psychopathy will do a lot of really dangerous things and might have a lot of harm happen to them. They might have very little nervousness when they're about to rob a bank or a store or something because they just don't feel fear. And I've talked about this before, that one of the theories, and I don't know if this is a strong theory, but it makes some sense to me in terms of how some people become psychopaths, is that it's helpful to have a fear response, especially when we're trying to gauge danger in our life, but also socially. That when we are 2 years old and we are about to throw a rock at another kid at the playground, or we're 3 or 4, and our parents will say, no, don't do that. Or when you throw the rock and you hit the child reacts with anger or something and looks at you with this angry face and might even go up to you, and so it's important to have that experience that when you throw a rock at someone and you hurt someone, scary things start happening to you. Another parent walks up to you and grabs your arm and says, "What are you doing?" Or someone looks at you in a scary way, or the other kids come up to you and say, "Don't do that," or a kid picks up a rock and starts to throw it at you. That fear response that happens right after a behavior, throw rock, a lot of scary things are happening. It embeds in us an association that helps in moral development, in personality development. So if you don't have that fear, you throw rock, and then all these people start doing all these things that for a normal kid would be very concerning and very scary. For the psychopath, they don't feel anything. They're just like, everyone's reacting. That's interesting. And so they're not given a chance to develop a morality in terms of, now, on some level, people say like, so are you saying that our morals are based on an effort to avoid scary situations? And, there's some evidence that at least part of our morals emerge from that. Like when we lie, when non-psychopathic, pathological liars, when typical people are about to lie, they will have a physiological response because there's a fear, there's a cringing, like, I don't want to say this. And why do we have that emotional reaction? It's because when we were young, we had enough experiences where we did something against another human being, whether it was lying or something, and bad things happen where it's like, well, I'll just, like imagine you're at a store or something, like you're returning a shirt and the clerk is like, so was there something wrong with it? And in your mind, you're like, well, nothing's wrong with it, but it doesn't fit right. And I should have tried it on in the store, but I didn't. But I really want my money back. And so in your mind, you're thinking, should I say that there's something wrong with the shirt because that'll give me a greater chance of getting my money back? And that feeling you have, you might start to sweat, you might start to stammer, you might get a little nervous, you might say things a little funny, it might not come out very well. And you might even refrain. You might have been going into the store saying, I'm definitely going to lie. I'm definitely going to say there's something wrong with the shirt because I need this money back because money's tight these days. But at the last minute, you're like, no, nothing's wrong. I just bought it by mistake. Like, why do we do that? Well, some would say because it's your moral compass. Others might say it's because you're afraid of the consequences that might happen if you do lie. Are those the same thing? Not always, of course. There are morals that I think have nothing to do with that fear response that we have. But anyway, so you can imagine if a kid there was something different about their brain that made it so they didn't have much or any fear, then they might not have the chance to develop any morals and thus become a psychopath later in life because they just don't care about other human beings. Does that mean they're sadistic though? No, right? That doesn't mean that they actually want to harm other people. It just means that they don't care, and they also will be seemingly very impulsive with their behavior because from the outside you're just like, how do you just do that? You just did that thing, like you just decided to do that thing. It's because there's no fear of what might happen. That's why they're impulsive. But anyway, so it's like, it's not wrong, but it's very brief. And so my point is that if you're a therapist and you don't have, because the thing to know is that and the person was, I think, a master's level therapist, and I was a master's level therapist for many years, but even doctoral level people, the amount of education you get in your graduate degree is extensive, but a very brief introduction to all of the things that we discuss in psychology. And so the typical graduate from a doctorate program or a master's program knows very little about the things that they studied. Plus, a lot of stuff was crammed in their head, and it's hard to retain it. 99%, if not more, of what I know about psychology and psychotherapy, I learned on my own after graduation. Can someone be a clinician on the internet and know nothing about what they don't even know enough to know that they don't know what they're talking about, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and they make these public statements like, if your boyfriend lies about this thing, then it means they have dark tetrad traits. Yeah, it happens all the time, and I just wish that people would, I don't know, but the problem is a lot of clinicians, they don't have access to someone that can tell them that what they're reading isn't a good way of learning because if you're a therapist and you think, well, I'm in psychology and I read about, you could even read a few research articles on dark tetrad and still not really understand, because you need to understand personality, you need to understand research, you need to understand like the ground level understanding, because all these personality traits are pretty complex and you need a lot of experience knowing where the threshold is. Because could you say that he's being manipulative right now? Yeah, you could make that call, but is it an indication of dark tetrad Machiavellianism? No, it's not. It could be, but there's not a strong signal of that. How can I say that? Well, it's because I've studied it a lot. I've treated people who had this trait. I've talked with a lot of other experts around not just Machiavellianism, but also psychopathy and dark tetrad and personality measurement in general. So I can say that because I have a lot of experience. If I just read the sentence, manipulative includes manipulative behavior, that doesn't say anything in terms of, well, where's the threshold? Because literally everyone is manipulative. So is everyone dark tetra? Narcissism, grandiosity and lack of empathy. Everyone has been grandiose at some point. Everyone has had indications of lack of empathy at some point. Psychopathy, impulsivity. Everyone's been impulsive. Everyone's been callous at some point. Everyone has shown that they don't have remorse, and everyone is selfish at some point. So how do you know the difference between clinical psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, dark tetrad, sadism, and just regular run-of-the-mill stuff? It takes a lot of experience, and you can't just read on the internet. So anyway, the point is that he's starting to dip into some of that behavior. That's my whole point, is that he started, as I was saying earlier, if he were truly on the spectrum or higher on the spectrum, he would actually start going after her and saying, there's something wrong with you, which we see right now. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.